Welcome to the Unpacking the Framework video series. This series provides valuable information about the National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention. My name is Denise Luscombe, and this video introduction is being recorded on Wajak Noongar Budja. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and the land you're listening from, and recognise their continued connection to country, waterways and community. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present. This video is one of a series that describes the evidence and practice information that underpins the principles of the National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention. You will hear from both national and international speakers throughout this video series. This video covers ecologically-based, a universal principle of the National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention, and is presented by our national speaker, Catherine Wade. Catherine is Principal Research Specialist at Parenting Research Centre and leads research, evaluation and analysis activities in that role, with a focus on evaluating the implementation and impact of initiatives aimed at improving the lives of vulnerable families across Australia and internationally. Catherine is an experienced psychologist with extensive clinical expertise in families affected by vulnerability, disability and disadvantage. She's an internationally recognised expert in the area of parenting with intellectual disability and has designed parent education programs for this target cohort, providing training and coaching to professionals in best practice support for these parents across Sweden, the US, New Zealand, Japan and Australia. Her PhD was conducted on the theme of best practice support for parents with intellectual disability. Catherine has also worked in roles involving designing and delivering supports to families of children with disability and mental health concerns in her previous employment with Specialist Children's Services with the Victorian Government and with the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service at the Royal Children's Hospital, Melbourne. Catherine is a research affiliate with the Centre for Disability Research and Policy, Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences, University of Sydney, and a registered psychologist with the Psychology Board of Australia through the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency.
Thanks for that introduction. I'm Dr. Catherine Wade. I am a psychologist with experience of over 25 years practice and research, particularly focused on families with disability, including working in the past in Specialist Children's Services for government, also having worked in child and adolescent mental health services in Victoria. And over the past 23 years, I've been at the Parenting Research Centre. Currently, my role is as Principal Research Specialist, so heading up the research and evaluation activities at the Parenting Research Centre. And for those of you who don't know much about the Parenting Research Centre, we're essentially a research and development organisation with a focus on bringing the best available evidence to the practice of supporting those who are in a caregiving role in order to help children thrive. So a bit of an overview of what I'll cover today. I'll give some background to the theory behind ecological-based practice in working in the early childhood intervention space. And I'll talk about some of the evidence for ecological-based practice and give some practical examples of what it looks like, including some examples from my own work with families. Why is it important to be talking about ecological-based practice in early childhood intervention? Well, children don't live in isolation. They live in contexts. They come with homes, with families. They have exposure to early childhood education centres and carers and educators. They have friendship groups. They have cousins. They have neighbours. They have everyday environments that they live in. And these everyday environments provide a great opportunity for us to teach and support children, including by working with the people who have contact with them every day. By building early childhood intervention and ecological practice into a child's daily routines, we are increasing the impact of our teachings. Many more opportunities for the child to practice the skills they need become available when we're working with them and teaching them in the environments in which they naturally live and interact with others. And we're also increasing, by working in an ecological way, we're also increasing the expertise of others around the child to become the natural teachers to their child. Parents in particular are children's first and most important teachers. They spend the most amount of time with the child, and parents are more likely to use the skills that we know will help children learn and develop when these are embedded in other daily activities and routines of family life. All right, let's have a look at the next slide then. So just a really quick overview of what is ecological-based practice. It refers to an approach that recognises child development and learning occur within multiple interacting contexts or systems, not that the development and learning occur in isolation. So traditionally, early childhood intervention had focused primarily on the child's deficits or delays. In contrast, ecological approaches consider how the environmental factors support or hinder a child's development. And this is a pretty big paradigm shift from fixing the child to enhancing the environments where children live. It's kind of a different mindset, a different approach from the very outset. And the goal is to improve meaningful activities and meaningful participation in everyday activities within the natural environments that the child lives, rather than focusing on isolated skill development. This approach acknowledges that sustainable developmental progress depends on changing the ecology surrounding the child. So we think about the environments and how we can change and support the environments rather than how we can change and support the child of focus. This includes family dynamics, physical environments, but also community resources. The next slide I've got shows you where you can get some more information about ecological practice. The Raising Children Network provides a lot of resources for parents, but also for professionals, including this particular page that I'm showing here talks about how you can help children with disability learn through everyday interests and play. And I really do encourage you to jump onto the raisingchildren.net.au website and type in disability, and you'll find a lot of really useful resources, as I said, not just for parents, but also for professionals. So theoretical foundations, sort of underlying theory, if you like, to ecologically based practice. The main theoretical framework on which ecologically based practice is based is Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory. And this was developed by the developmental psychologist Urie Bronfenbrenner in the 1970s, and it was refined throughout his career. Bronfenbrenner proposed that development results from complex interactions between the child and multiple systems around the child. So he talked about the microsystem, which is the immediate environments where the child directly participates, their family, the classroom, the playground. And then the mesosystem is one layer out, and that talks about connections between microsystems. So the relationship between the home and child care, for example. And then the exosystem is the settings that indirectly affect the child, but that are still important. So the parent's workplace could be an example, or healthcare systems. And then the macro system, which is the cultural or societal values and policies that we have in place that impact services and supports that are available to families. And then the chronosystem, which is about time. Chrono always talks about time, changes over time in the child and their environments. Later revisions of Urie Bronfenbrenner's theory termed the bioecological model, which emphasised the bidirectional nature and of the interactions between these different systems, and also later versions of the ecological systems theory emphasised the importance of proximal processes, which are regular interactions over time between those different systems. So why is this theory helpful for us? Well, it gives us a model to help us understand that effective intervention must consider all of these layers of influence It's not just about the child's individual characteristics that we need to work with and work within. Early intervention has undergone a significant evolution over the decades, influenced by Bronfenbrenner's model, but other theories as well. And traditional approaches often position professionals as experts who would fix the child's problems through direct therapy in clinical settings. And these therapies often occurred in isolation from everyday contexts. Historical frameworks like the medical model focus primarily on fixing the impairments in the child and were delivered in specialised settings which were removed from children's everyday lives. But an ecological model represents a pretty big transformation towards more collaborative relationships where professionals partner with families and other caregivers. And this shift emphasises building capacity within systems rather than providing direct services in isolation. Transactional models of development also influence this evolution by highlighting that the dynamic and bidirectional relationships between children and their caregivers are super important. And today's best practice frameworks in the ECI space, such as Robin McWilliams' routines-based intervention and also coaching models, are deeply rooted in ecological principles in ECI. So a cornerstone of ecological practice is genuine family-centeredness. This is one of the core principles of ecological-based practice. Family-centered practice recognises that families are the constant in a children's lives, while service systems and providers can change. Key elements of a family-centered approach to working acknowledge families as experts on their children. They share information openly and completely with families. They recognise family strengths and they respect diversity. They ensure services enhance family functioning, not create dependency on services. And research shows that family engagement is one of the strongest predictors of intervention success when we're talking about early childhood intervention for children with developmental delay or disability. Family-centered practice requires professionals to shift from directive to facilitative roles, which can require significant shifts in professional training and mindsets. One of the metaphors that I love, and I often use this when I'm talking in a sort of professional development context, but that idea of us as professionals being supporting a mountain climber, trying to teach a parent how to climb a mountain. The parent is at the coalface. They're on the mountain. They're the ones sort of picking out the stones that look acceptable for them to put a hand on to help them to get up the mountain. They can see where the footholds are. They can see the branches overhanging that might be a danger or a help to them. They're at the coalface. They can understand what's going on in that immediate context. But the professional is on the ground, meters away from where the parent is at the coalface, at the mountain face. But they can see things up ahead that might be a challenge for the parent, an overhanging rock that's going to be a real big challenge for that parent to overcome. So they can call out directions from down below. Maybe go to the right, then you'll be on a good path to get to the top of the mountain. They also have the parents back. They're the ones holding the rope that keeps the parent secure. And there's something about that metaphor that really resonates with me because it's giving respect to the fact that the family is there dealing with the challenges and the successes of parenting a child with developmental delay or disability. But the professional has expertise too. The parent certainly has the expertise, but the professional has the expertise too, and they can see things with a bit more clarity from a distance, but then missing the detail up close. So you need to consider the need for supports for other family members as well. And the QR code that I've put on the screen there will take you to the webpage for the My Time Peer Support Group. And that's just one option and one important option for supporting the whole family. The My Time Peer Support Groups is just one example of a peer support program, but it's specifically set up in Australia to support parents of children with disability. And the My Time groups run across Australia, including virtually, and they provide parents of children with disability peer support and self-care. So it's time for them, time for the parent, time for the carer. We need to ensure that parents are fully equipped to meet the needs of their child, not just in terms of skills that they need to teach the child and help the child develop, but also in terms of the parent having the emotional resources to meet their own needs and their children's needs. And My Time is an example of a peer support program that will do that. Another core principle underlying ecological-based practice is natural environments. And these are the places where children typically spend the most time. Research consistently shows that children learn best in familiar, meaningful contexts with materials and people they encounter regularly. Rather than creating artificial learning scenarios, ecological approaches capitalise on learning opportunities within existing routines and activities. So examples could include using mealtime for communication development, practicing motor skills during playground play, developing social skills during childcare activities, or learning cognitive concepts during bath time or grocery shopping. So natural environment practices foster generalization of skills because learning occurs where the skills will be used and where they will be needed. So it allows us to think about how I can use these skills in this context, but also potentially other relevant contexts or settings where the child will be. So we at the Parenting Research Centre were big advocates for teaching parenting skills in the settings where we want those skills to be learned, which is typically in the home. Most parenting is done in the home. Home-based individual parenting skill development is better practice. Means that skills that we teach the parent in the home are more likely to be maintained over time, but also generalised to other settings. Another core principle of ecological-based practice is relationship-based approaches, which recognise that development occurs within the context of relationships. And strong relationships between the child and the adults around them provide the emotional foundation for exploration and learning. That's the reason why we focus on this. Research from the Harvard Center on the Developing Child highlights how responsive, contingent interactions literally shape brain architecture in the child. And they have some fantastic videos demonstrating this on their website. The ecological approach extends beyond parent-child relationships to also consider peer relationships, interactions between children, teacher-child relationships, extended family connections, but also professional to family relationships. And the quality of relationships between professionals and families also impacts intervention effectiveness, highlighting the importance of trust and respect in the helping relationship. Relationships between professionals are also important. Are you all working on the same page? Is there consistent messaging? I've got an example from my own practice a few years ago when I was working with a parent. And the parent themselves had an intellectual disability, but I was going into the home and working with them on parent-child interactions, trying to encourage the parent to spend more time in play, on the floor, in the lounge room, with the children's toy, using lots of language with the child. And this parent had a lot of other services coming into the home and providing other types of supports, which were great. But the problem was the parent often had no idea who the different professionals were, which organisation they were representing, and what they were doing with the parent. So one day I asked this parent, I knew that there had been a speech therapist that was coming into the home and there'd been a dietitian coming into the home helping the family to create healthy meals. And I asked the parent, oh, did you have a session with Marie this week, the dietitian? Oh, yep, Marie came into the house. Good. What did she do with you? Oh, she just talked. We just talked. We had a cup of coffee and we just talked. But the mum, and after a bit more conversation between me and this parent, the mum couldn't tell me what the dietitian was working on and why she was coming into the home. And what the goal was that they were working towards together, to create healthy meals for the family. So I think it was a good opportunity for me to realise I needed to have a conversation with Marie. Marie needed to understand what I was doing in the home and the opportunities I had to reinforce what Marie was doing as the dietitian with this parent. So it just highlighted to me that I'm not working in isolation with this family. I'm working with a team of people around the families. That's not always the case. It won't always be the case that there's lots of services and lots of supports involved with a family. But where it is, it's super important that we're all aware of what each other are doing, and we're all helping each other to help the parent work towards each other's goals as well as our own goals. Another core principle of ecological-based practice is functional outcomes. So ecological approaches prioritize functional outcomes. So these are skills that enhance participation in everyday activities and routines. And the emphasis on functional outcomes is important rather than focusing on test scores, for example. We focus on meaningful activities, and outcomes are important for functioning in everyday activities and routines. So examples of functional outcomes might include that Thomas will participate in family meals by sitting at the table for 10 minutes and using gestures to request more food. It's a pretty wordy one, pretty long goal. Another example might be that Sarah will engage with peers during playground time by taking turns on the slide with minimal adult support. Again, pretty wordy, but you can see how they're more functional. You can see where they're going in terms of what function we want them to achieve. Functional outcomes focus on engagement, independence, and social relationships within natural context rather than on isolated skills. So it's not about teaching Thomas to sit down at the table. It's about teaching him to sit down at the table, interact with his peers, choose foods, within that sort of natural experience of a meal time with family. And this approach ensures that intervention efforts address what matters most to children and families in their daily lives. Another core principle of ecological-based practice is taking a strengths-based perspective, which shifts the focus from what children can't do to what they can do, and using these strengths as foundations for learning. And this approach recognises multiple pathways to development rather than expecting all children to follow the same identical trajectory or pathway. Taking a strength-based approach extends beyond the child to identifying strengths in parents and caregivers, but also in communities and the support systems around the child. A practical application of using a strength-based approach might look like starting where the child is at, identifying what the child already does and building on their scaffolding, if you like. And Vygotsky's zone of proximal development is a helpful theoretical framework that's useful for us to think about, knowing what the child can do and also knowing what's just outside their reach in terms of skills, and working in that zone in between what they can do and what they just can't do to shape up the skills and behaviours that we want the child to be able to demonstrate. And we can do that for parents too. We start with what they already can do or what they already do routinely, and we help to stretch them to the next level of expertise. And we can also help parents and children by building confidence by highlighting successes. That's another aspect of strength, taking a strength-based perspective. And don't underestimate the value of praise. We need to be celebrating success. Just because praise might feel a bit awkward to you when your boss tells you you've done a good job, it doesn't mean that other people feel awkward about hearing what a great job they're doing. Really important to emphasize that praise is an important part of reinforcing and the strength-based perspective. In our work, we tend to talk a lot about assessment. We have lots of tools, don't we, for assessing progress and assessing where a child is at. It's important to think about why we are assessing, the purpose of assessment. We also need to consider what tools we're using to assess. And when you think about what you need to employ, for example, if you were needing to employ a new staff member, think about what's the best way to test whether somebody is perfect for a role. It's not necessarily interviewing them. We all have to do an interview to get a job, of course, but that's a pretty unreliable way of assessing whether somebody is good for a particular role. Paper and pencil testing aren't particularly good too. We can do aptitude testing, we can do, cognitive assessments, but it provides one dimension only, how smart the person is, how intelligent the person is, or how good their reading or numeracy is. But it's really only once they're in the job that we get a good understanding of a person's skills and capabilities. And that's why we have probationary periods, right? So that we have a period of time where we're working with the new staff member to see if they can adapt to the requirements of the job and they can perform in the job after a period of time. And it also, that probationary period, if you like, it's also where we see what else we might need to put in place in order to help that person do the job better. So what other training is needed, what other job supports are needed for that person to be able to do their job well. So in order to understand how the person functions in their new role, we need to see them in action. And the same is true for children in an ECI context. So an ecological assessment in the context of early childhood intervention moves beyond standardized testing to understanding functioning across contexts. Rather than assessing what children can do in controlled environments or under test conditions, we observe what they actually do in everyday situations. And I remember back to my training as a psychologist, we spent a lot of time learning about IQ tests and adaptive behavior tests, etc. We did a lot of practice of administering those sorts of tests with children, often children in our extended family. But we also spent a lot of time learning about behavioural observation of children. And I can remember in my master's spending hours in early childhood education centres in the area close to where I lived, standing like a really awkward student in the corner watching kids. And I think I had a clipboard and I was, taking notes about what the child do or recording incidences of particular behaviours. And it was just as a way to teach us how to do the importance of behavioural observation. And I soon learned how to do that better. And I was, towards the end, I was much more interactive with the children and with the educators and much less, like a strange person standing in the corner observing. So it's a skill that we need to hone, but it's a really important skill for when we're doing assessments. We can't, it's, test scores might tell us one thing, but they're static. They're a point in time and they're in a fake kind of, set up test-like situation. That behavioural observations, observing what's going on and taking note of patterns is the most important aspect of any sort of assessment. An ecological assessment incorporates observation as the primary source of data collection. And some important assessment approaches within an ecological approach include echo mapping. You probably do a lot of that already, which is sort of a visual representation of the family and connections between family members and the resources that are available to the child, which might impact on the early childhood intervention work that you're going to be doing. Routines-based interviews are a structured conversation that a professional might have with a family about daily routines that occurs. And home and community observation. There are lots of tools available to help you do this in a structured way. So I do a lot of work, as you might have gathered, in the parenting with intellectual disability space. And one of the big names in that field is Maurice Feldman. He's a Canadian researcher and clinician, and he's developed an assessment framework called Step by Step. And it's essentially a set of tools that helps a professional conduct a behavioural observation, an observation of a parent-child interaction, for example, or parenting skills, and recording that observation in a really structured way. And we've actually adapted that Maurice Feldman's step-by-step curriculum in a program that we developed at the Parenting Research Centre. That program is called Parenting Young Children. And again, it uses structured observations of what's going on in the home, either parenting skills or parent-child interaction skills, a structured way of the professional observing the parent in their natural environment, making notes of and recording how the parent is going with particular skills that you might be working on, and using that data from the observation to inform the work that you do in that session. So it's really using data in an immediate sense to make decisions about intervention, about the supports that you provide. Benefits of taking an ecological approach to assessment can include that it considers multiple perspectives, including parents, siblings, teachers, and the extended family. It also identifies both supports and barriers to participation across settings. It's also culturally appropriate because you can adapt the requirements of the assessment to suit different ways of doing things. There might be different ways of achieving the same objective, and you can incorporate that into your assessment. And it's important to keep in mind that assessment in an ecological approach is viewed as ongoing. It's an ongoing process, not a one-time event. So there are regular opportunities to reflect on progress and to make adjustment to goals and adjustment to your intervention. Like I was talking about with the Parenting Young Children program, we're using the data we're collecting daily to make adjustments to the work that we're doing to support the family. Evidence suggests that these ecological approaches to intervention are both more effective and more efficient than traditional discipline-specific approaches, and there's a substantial body of research that supports this, and I've got some of the key references on the slide there. I'm not exhaustive list of references though, there's certainly lots of others. But Dunst and Trivett and their colleagues have done a lot of research over the years, including some meta-analysis in 2007, which demonstrated that family-centred practices are associated with improved outcomes for both children and families. Interventions embedded in routines lead to better generalisation than clinic-based approaches, and there's lots of evidence to support that. Parent-implemented interventions show stronger maintenance of effects over time compared to child-focused service delivery. Coaching models have a lot of evidence to suggest that they result in greater parent competence and confidence, and children make progress when functional goals when intervention aligns with family priorities. So there's lots of evidence out there to support an ecologically based approach to working. It's a bit of a fundamental shift in how we approach early childhood intervention for young children with disabilities or developmental delays, moving from a child-focused remediation of problems to enhancing the context where children live and learn requires a bit of a transformational approach at multiple levels. So individual practice change, we need to change the way that we work, but also program structures and policies need to change. We need to think differently about how we prepare our personnel, how we prepare our professionals to work within systems. So there's something that needs to change in the way that we educate our early childhood interventionists. Funding mechanisms need to change, measurement approaches need to change. So it is quite a different approach to the more traditional child-focused service delivery model. But the evidence does strongly suggest that this approach leads to more meaningful and sustainable outcomes by building capacity within natural support systems rather than creating dependency on specialised services. So ultimately, ecological approaches support the development of inclusive communities where all children can participate and thrive. Thanks for your attention. I hope this has been a useful discussion of what ecological practice in ECI can look like. All the best.
We hope you've enjoyed this video, part of the video series Unpacking the Framework for the National Best Practice Framework for Early Childhood Intervention. The review of best practice in early childhood intervention was commissioned by the Department of Social Services. Led by the University of Melbourne, the project team included PRECI, professionals and researchers in early childhood intervention, Murdoch Children's Research Institute, SNAKE, National Voice for Our Children, Children and Young People with Disability Australia, and ACD, Advocating for Children with Disability. Coordination and production of the video series was led by PRECI.